Thank you so much, Caroline. So good afternoon, everyone. Thanks for joining us today. This is the Accelerate Data Insights with Emerging Tech panel. My name is Joe Franco. I'm the Director of Programs here at MeriTalk, and I'll be the moderator for today's panel. Before we get started, thank you so much to Hitachi Vantara Federal for sponsoring today's panel. Support from partners like Hitachi are the reason we're able to have critical conversations like these, and it's a really great conversation we have lined up today, so super excited. As you do listen today, if you have a question, you can submit it using the Ask a Question toolbar on your screen. We'll respond via email to as many as possible and pass them along to the panelists and try to get you a response. We also have several additional resources available on your screen today. Our program is also going to be available on demand in case you want to reference this panel again. So with that, let's get started. The panel today is going to explore how federal agencies are collecting more data than ever. It's across the edge, data sits in the core data center and in the cloud. Data volumes are already greater than humans' capacity to capture and analyze them, right? So we're turning to machines. We're going to look at how data operations are becoming increasingly automated to deliver close to real-time insights, and how organizations in the government are leveraging modern data platforms and other emerging technologies to accelerate AI-driven innovation. You can't get away from the AI discourse today, fueled by ChatGPT and everything else we're talking about in the public discourse. So excited to not focus on ChatGPT, but instead focus on some of the amazing mission areas and use cases that we have in government. We have a great group of panelists today that bring a wide range of experience to draw from. Great, so let's introduce today's panelists. First, we have Captain Brian Erickson. Brian is the Chief Data and Artificial Intelligence Officer for the U.S. Coast Guard, a new role, and his principal responsibility is for the coordination of data and AI activities across the entire Coast Guard. So Brian, welcome. I'd love it if you could introduce yourself to the audience and tell us a little bit about your role.
So thank you so much, Joe, for having me on. My background is a little bit weird. So right now I hold the title of Chief Data and Artificial Intelligence Officer, the first one the Coast Guard has ever had. We just started a data transformation about 3 years ago. The organization's 233 years old. So, this kind of represents, I think, a fast-moving opportunity for the organization to become more data-driven, more data literate, and me and my team, the Office of Data and Analytics, are kind of leading that charge across the organization. My background, I kind of get this question often, is a little bit weird for a chief data officer. I'm a helicopter pilot, primarily search and rescue helicopters. I've also flown C-130, some of our fixed wing assets. So essentially my whole career has primarily been in operations. I'm also an aerospace engineer, so I kind of worked on the logistics side of aviation, but very recently, within the last couple of years, I was able to get this opportunity to lead the Coast Guard kind of in this new area, and I can't be more happy to have gotten this opportunity. So that's a little bit about my background.
Awesome, thank you for sharing, and we're excited to hear about what you're working on now. So next we have Dr. Amanda Lienau, who is the Director of Data and Analytics Innovation for VHA in the Department of Veterans Affairs. So her primary focus is increasing the meaningful use of information to increase access to care, improve equitable outcomes, and improve quality of life for our veterans. So an excellent mission there. Amanda, welcome. Could you please introduce yourself to the audience as well?
So my name is Amanda Lienau. I'm a psychologist by training, and I'm the Director of Data and Analytics Innovation for the Veterans Healthcare Administration. What's interesting maybe about my background is the opportunity to focus on how humans interact and how we change processes over time. So the focus on really engaging teams and engaging people in connecting to information and adopting new technology.
Excellent, thank you, Amanda. Yeah, super exciting. I wasn't expecting, and on these IT-focused panels, we don't always get the opportunity to talk to a clinician as well as a helicopter pilot. So really thrilled to have you guys join us. Also love how you're mentioning the human side of things, right? We mentioned ChatGPT, and I think increasingly so we're talking about where does the human fit into this discussion when it comes to artificial intelligence, but very human in the approach of what you're doing to help our veterans. So thank you. We're also joined by Gary Hicks. Gary is the Chief Technology Officer for Hitachi Vantara Federal. more than 25-year industry veteran in the IT industry, and also brings more than a decade of experience as a trusted advisor for federal civilian, defense, and intelligence agencies. So Gary, welcome. Appreciate you joining us, and introduce yourself to our audience today.
Hey, great. Thanks for having me. I feel a bit underqualified since all I've done is IT my entire career. I haven't flown anything or been a psychologist, so I'm kind of boring from that perspective, I guess. Been at Hitachi 10 years, and our primary focus really started on data storage infrastructure, but it's morphed in the last 5 years just to focus on data-centric solutions. So.
Awesome, Gary. And we were chatting before this, and it's a good kind of boring, right? All the data that you guys are exploring and helping federal agencies get a handle on, it's far from ordinary. So don't sell yourself short. Really excited to dive into this one. And I'm gonna kind of toss it right to you to get us going here.
Sure.
Want to talk about the phrase data driven, right? Because this is popping up all throughout the federal ranks, kind of a buzzword, of course, right? But everybody wants to be data driven these days. I'm curious what that means to you, if you would describe your own organization as such, and then importantly, how you're helping government agencies in this sort of self-espoused journey to become data driven.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think data driven at the end of the day is really taking full advantage of the data you have in your enterprise. And there's some key challenges that most of our customers have issues with. Data is everywhere. They have many copies of the data. They're not always entirely sure where they exist, whether they're on-prem in a cloud, whether they're in one specific mission area. That data sharing element is just not always there. So that data is everywhere, and it's growing rapidly. Like you mentioned with AI/ML, everyone's keeping everything even longer. You dovetail that with the cloud complexity. We have all our customers are at some portion of the cloud continuum, from being, hey, we're still all going public cloud, or no, we're keeping everything on-prem, to where I think everyone's going to land up is hybrid cloud. So everyone's kind of dealing with that. You combine all these new technologies and data initiatives with the current kind of skill sets that people have, and there needs to be some retraining of some people. The technology moves very quickly, especially in the data ops area. New technologies come out every day, new open source, new ways to manipulate data and manage it. So there's a skills gap as it relates to that. And kind of the last one is everyone is dealing with legacy infrastructure. The IT budgets have not been where they need to be in many cases to keep technology refreshes going, or in many cases, customers didn't refresh because they thought everything was going to move to the public cloud. With the cloud first mandate in 2010, everyone started moving that direction. They didn't think, well, I'm never going to have anything on-prem, but it turns out we have a lot of legacy infrastructure, and all that legacy infrastructure is storing mission data and important data for a lot of our customers. And the key ways that we approach that with our customers is kind of twofold, two kind of initial things. One, to modernize the digital infrastructure, the digital core, and that's everything from on-prem technology to hybrid cloud technology, and keeping track of that data that exists and storing it and managing it in an efficient fashion. The next layer is kind of optimizing the data fabric. Once you have that kind of consistent infrastructure wherever it lives, managing that data as really a product, or there's the comment, data is the new oil. Data is out there and has unique value. So it's taking advantage of that data fabric to really share data across all these different domains and get the maximum value out of that data, and make sure the right people are accessing it, because data security is always an issue as you get more and more diverse in your data landscape. And what this allows you to do after that phase is really allows you to engineer data-driven outcomes, which is taking all that data and creating specific kind of architectures and use cases that are going to meet your mission requirements, whether it's smart bases or smart spaces or supply chain intelligence. All that is possible with the right data framework. And you see this in all the branches of government, between the executive branch with the president's management agenda. DoD started with the JADC2, and even the legislative branch has policy boards that they're spinning up now to really action on all the data that is existing, because that's the biggest challenge a lot of us have is really getting a handle on the data that exists and making it usable.
So, and I really, before we bring in the government perspective, I just want to pull on that thread for a little bit. Like, how are you seeing agencies currently kind of coping with this deluge of data that you're mentioning here, especially, since, as we discussed, it's everywhere. It's the edge, it's the core, it's the data center, it's in the cloud. Like, what are you seeing, and what are the primary takeaways?
I think everyone is looking towards getting kind of enterprise view of their data through using things like data catalog technologies and things of that nature. But I think it's also still very kind of program and mission specific, where it's kind of isolated. There's still, we've always been challenged with the silos of data where, this is my data, I'm not going to share it with anybody. And it's trying to break down those silos. So we work with a lot of our customers to put that kind of policy and governance in place. But it's something that just takes time to get everything in place and get the right architectures in place, things like hybrid cloud ready infrastructures. Like I said, that's where everyone's going to end up, but that's where we want to get to, making sure that data is in the right place at the right time, at the right speed or level of access, to make sure that their missions are being met. And we're seeing a lot of interest, especially in HPC and AI ML environments, around new technologies that allow these, high expensive, high performance GPUs really access data consistently and concurrently to speed and make it much more efficient at data management and analysis in the environment.
Now, Brian and Amanda, I want to dive into the very mission specific aspects of your role as it pertains to data. But first of all, let's continue with that part of the discussion. I want to know, like Gary was alluding to, what are some of the tools or techniques that you're using or you think are best suited for agencies to connect all of their data wherever it sits, from the edge to the core? Brian, why don't we start with you?
Yeah, so I always want to make a comment about kind of how Gary walked down the journey, if you will, to hybrid cloud, to then looking at your data fabric, and then ultimately, all the possibilities that you can achieve with kind of a modernized data or a mature data agenda. Is exactly the journey we're on right here in the Coast Guard. I mean, he couldn't have said it better. We have for a long period of time have had an on-prem, part of our organization that was managed internally and managed well, and a lot of our data sits in that on-prem area. Slowly, we would kind of move to siloed cloud environments, but really never kind of a formal cloud of our own, and that's what we're standing up right now. This month, we're starting to put, containers in our own, our cloud infrastructure and laying down the policy on how we're going to onboard other applications and platforms within this cloud environment to have a more friction-free exchange of data for our organization. And then, looking forward beyond that, just like Gary said, as we take advantage of modern compute and high capacity compute storage, what we're going to be able to do using AI ML, type of models and algorithms and activity that we're not doing today. So all of the silos that he talks about exist. As we also begin to kind of explore the edge to the tactical edge of our operations and moving the data from the tactical edge to our cloud-based warehouse for analysis or kind of deeper analytics or more broad analytics across the organization. We're really kind of taking a close look at our transport layers and how we move that, and that's really kind of in the CIO lane, not necessarily the CDAIO lane. But I will offer kind of one recent game changer that we got on board with is we awarded some contracts to Starlink and started to put that on our cutters. One of the biggest pain points within our organization was low connectivity with our cutter fleets as they went, on what was really worldwide deployment, but far outside of nearshore operations. And recently, within the last 3 months, we've started to conduct installs, and they're happening quite rapidly. And we are hearing game-changing results from the cutter fleet. So we went from the biggest pain point of our surface fleet being connectivity to, oh my God, I'm sitting, in South China Sea right now. I'm sitting off the coast of Coast Guard Cutter Eagle. Our cadet training ship is off of the coast of Europe right now with lightning fast, connectivity. And I'll tell you what, that's been a big help for our edge to cloud and edge analytics.
That's awesome, and I really appreciate you sharing that example, because the frame of this event series, it's called New and Next, right? And we've obviously heard a lot about Starlink and what that might mean for the future, and so it's cool to see that you guys are having game-changing results there. Amanda, I'll turn to you. I love that the kind of lens for your role is focusing on outcomes, but I'm curious what kind of tools, techniques, or approaches you're using to kind of fuel that data journey at VHA.
So I'm grateful to work for the VA in that we have historically adopted new technologies early. So the VA was the first to create electronic health record. And we were very early adopters of cloud resources, and we're very curious about modern technology. But there are very human principles that come into play when you think about healthcare and benefits and people's lives. So as we adopt any new technology, are thinking about, first of all, trust. Can we trust this information? Is it near real time? Do people find this information to be relevant and meaningful? Do they know that it's of high quality and that it's useful for them? So secondly, it's about value or impact. Is this the right amount of information for me? Is it given to me in a way that I can access it? The average person is fairly overwhelmed by all of the technological terms, the modern technology. They might even think of the word data and be totally overwhelmed. Then you say, this is information that you're going to make use of. And people say, okay, I do like good information. But if they're looking at ones and zeros, their eyes glaze over, they get a little overwhelmed. And so it's really about making use of technologies in the background and providing it to people in a way that's accessible to the average user. So we really think about human-centered design principles. So there's all the technology going off in the background, right? We need cloud compute, we need GPUs, we need to make use of modern compute technologies that are appropriate for that use case. And then as we're designing it for actual use, we want to avoid over-informing folks and giving them just the right amount of information so that they can do what they need to do to take care of our veterans.
Excellent. And that's a really great segue into what I mentioned that we want to talk about, which is the mission impact here, right? So Amanda, I'll stick with you. I'd love to hear a lot about what your office is working on, right, when it comes to data management and operations, but particularly around the lens of some of the things that you're working on, like life-saving care, like you mentioned, right? So I'm curious how emerging technologies like AI and ML fit into that, and what results you're hoping to see or seeing already that'll impact veterans' health.
Where we're seeing real enthusiasm around emerging tech, and particularly data analytics technologies, is in reducing administrative burden. So I think most people are aware of the problem of burnout. Healthcare is one of the areas where burnout is high. And so we're making use of artificial intelligence, large language models, natural language processing to help make the lives of our care teams easier. So of the hundreds of images that are collected, we can use AI to prioritize, do an early identification, and then make the workflow easier for the clinicians so that when they're engaging in care, they're doing less sifting through information. We're making smart use of optical character recognition to take scanned documents and make them machine readable. Again, we literally had humans scanning sheets of paper, and now we can use technology to do that work for us and to identify meaningful information for clinical care. So where we're seeing AI, ML, and NLP is for those things that humans aren't really good at. Image recognition. So that's a whole host of different, dermatology, lung cancer screening, CT, X-ray, all of those areas, as well as like literally scanning through paper documents. How can we reduce the administrative burden so that humans do what humans are uniquely good at, which is connecting with other people?
Excellent. Thank you so much for sharing. Brian, I'll go to you. Like looking at your new role, right? You started a data organization at the Coast Guard, what I understand, essentially from the ground up, right? With a data readiness task force, and now this office that you head up. So what has that meant for the mission of the Coast Guard? How are you kind of balancing these requirements for data strategy and governance with the need to adopt new technology approaches? You've already mentioned some of them, to like get to a better place for what you're looking to do to keep us safe.
Yeah, so I think that this is kind of like the job of a CDAO often, is to kind of balance some really hard, fundamental, long-term problems and get after some problems that have built up in an organization that's been around for 233 years. You obviously are going to have some data problems, but when it comes to governance and metadata or data tagging, authoritative data sources, that's overhead work. Like, nobody wants to talk about that. We want outcomes from our activity. So I have to balance immediate business value with what I call fundamental challenges, almost data debt, and we kind of work through that. And that's kind of on a daily job, I've got to focus myself into two camps. On the emerging side, we partner often with our Department of Defense partners. I'm tight and close with the Chief Digital and Artificial Intelligence Office with DoD. We're also partnered with we're a member of the intelligence community, so we're partnered with our IC elements to bring some of the more exotic or best of breed tools from the IC into other domains. Some of the areas that are providing us some early interest is in computer vision and natural language processing. Natural language processing, we could imagine a Coast Guard boarding team going out and finding a vessel at sea and conducting a boarding for law enforcement reasons, perhaps trafficking narcotics, and there's a language barrier there. And being able to have a device that converts, be able to converse with the maritime personnel that we're working with, that's something of value to us that we're working through. Another area of interest is small object detection, using computer vision algorithms on aircraft or other sensors to be able to identify small objects in the water that the operator, using the naked eye, would otherwise not be able to detect. Imagine small bounding boxes around an object, and then being able to have the operator look in that direction and identify if this is a target of interest. Is this an overturned kayak? Are there people in the water? Could this potentially be a semi-submersible submarine trafficking narcotics? And those types of AI advantages, analytics, require a lot of training data, require a lot of effort to build the algorithms to become useful, and we're kind of in the process of evaluating each one on their own individual merit as to how it's going to benefit our mission and operations.
Excellent. Yeah, and you bring up a really interesting point, which is that it's difficult to get a handle on all this. And Amanda, you mentioned as well, like for the everyday person, data is an overwhelming concept even. So Gary, I'm just curious, how we can invest in, the resources that are necessary to build capacity and build skills to leverage emerging technology like AI, right? I know that agencies are kind of investing in these areas now, but maybe there's a gap between current capabilities and what we hope to do with new technology. So what do you think are some of the biggest unfilled skills requirements today, and how can government agencies help solve those?
Yeah, I think a lot of the challenges that we see is this is a relatively nascent field, and a lot of the people that have the skills or have experience with it are, young PhD students. They're still in college at this sense. I think industry has done a pretty good job of developing these data science practices through internships and attracting that type of talent. Because frankly, if you look at kind of my team, I have pre-sales engineers that are later in their careers, but I also have a data engineering team that's probably in their mid 20s. So I think that industry has done a good job at kind of doing that internships. And there's a few government agencies, NSA comes to mind, that has a really robust intern program to kind of recruit that talent, kind of pre-built out of college. And I think that's where a lot of agencies are starting to look towards is how do I backfill this? Because you go to market, it's a challenging skill set to find. Data engineering is really kind of a new approach, and it's a rapidly dynamic changing technology landscape day in and day out. Every day there's a new startup in the data analytics space. There's not so much movement in the infrastructure space or the switch space. So I think it's just learning how to be more creative with developing that talent.
Excellent. Amanda, I'm curious your perspective as well, how you guys are investing in skills development, and what do you see as the biggest areas of need and the biggest opportunities?
I want to just agree with what Gary is saying. This is a rapidly developing field, and the challenge we run into is we can recruit and get enthusiastic fellows and interns who are excited to learn and work with the VA. It's hard to retain talent because we have a different pay scale than industry. So when there's a small number of highly, sought after skilled individuals, there's a small subset who will work for mission and impact. Many people will struggle to make that financial decision as they might have families or other commitments. So the biggest challenge we have actually is retaining really incredible talent. So some of the approaches we've taken within the VA is providing training programs to individuals within the VA who want to develop data science skills. Maybe they don't have a specific credential or a specific kind of academic training, but doing training on the job with VA data. So we've noticed a real impact for bringing people into the VA and connecting them to the unique assets within the VA.
Awesome. Brian, I'll turn to you. Your thoughts on the biggest areas of skills development needed within the Coast Guard, and then just as a tie-off to that, what's your vision kind of for your department and some of its capabilities and what you hope to accomplish over the next, say, 5 years, and some of the data-driven innovations that you're expecting to see?
The Coast Guard has never really looked at itself through a data lens until this office came along, and we didn't even know how to do that. There was no chief data officer, there was no chief of governance or chief of analytics or chief of data integration now, and we have that now. And now that we look at ourselves and where we can bring the existing analyst network, which we have had for many years, operations research and data analysts throughout the organization. We've had a major at the Coast Guard Academy. Even when I was there was a long time ago. I'm not even going to say when, but a long time ago when I was there, we had an operations research major that became operations research data analyst. So the analysts have been taking the brunt of the entire data lifecycle effort in the Coast Guard, for as long as we've been around. For as long as I've been in the organization, up until maybe just recently, 3 years or so, data was looked at as an IT function. And I think that now we've kind of changed the landscape, and it is looked at as a core business function. And it no longer just falls on the IT department, but rather there's a suite of professionals that are needed if you truly want to treat your data as a strategic asset. And like Gary said, eventually create data products within your organization. So what are the types of people that we need in the Coast Guard? We identified 5 work roles, and these are based off of about 10 innovation roles that came out within DoD recently. But our 5 work roles that we're going to put in place within the organization are data steward, data analyst, data scientist, AI ML specialist, and data engineer. And we are getting an idea as to where we need those within each individual domain that kind of lines up with our business verticals, and then what types of people we need. And then we're gonna, do a number of different things. We're gonna resource for that. We're going to reskill. We're going to upskill. We're going to contract in expertise to ensure that the data can go from the from the capture, from data capture to data consumption in a much more friction-free environment. So, to your last question, what does it look like, 5 years out? I imagine, and maybe this is just my rainbows and unicorns imagination, but I imagine this, that we are in domains, that each domain understands what data they own, that there are stewards within these domains. They care about the data. They're producing their domain for the rest of the organization as a product. There are, data scientists deployed where they need to be. There are AI and ML operators deployed where they need to be, and they're conducting much more complex, but much more valuable data activities than we are completing today. So, like Gary and Joe, really, you talked about how quickly this landscape changes. And we saw, in September of 22, when the introduction of large language models came out, that for all we know, the next coding language might be English. It's changing so quickly. What a data scientist was yesterday may not be what they are tomorrow. So luckily, we now have an office that is devoted to this activity, and we are going to care for our data like we care for our ships and our aircraft. And that's what our future is.
Really excellent. And I really, really appreciate that response. And I love how your response about skills development aligns with your vision for the future too. So Amanda, I'll turn to you. What is your vision for, for the next 5 years in your office and for the future of veterans health?
So my goal in 5 years is that we spend this time rigorously evaluating the use of modern technologies like AI, ML, NLP, now large language models as well, and that we make use of those then in standard practice. So it's the rigorous evaluation of these technologies, trust building over time, and then scale to use so that it's no big deal when people are making use of modern technologies. It's something that people feel confident in the use of, and that it's part of the regular interaction.
Excellent. Yeah. And so we'll really look forward to that future. And Gary, now I hope you can tie it all up in a bow for us here and tell us, you've overseen like a lot of change in the IT industry, especially as it pertains to the use of data. What do you see the next 5 years going to look like, across the industry and across the public-private collaboration spectrum?
Yeah, I think what we're going to see is just as Amanda mentioned, the trust in data, the veracity of that data is one of the key areas that we look at. We look at kind of increasing volume, additional data. How do you manage that, store it, secure it? Really, at the end of the day, the veracity of it. How can I be sure that this data that I'm using is accurate? And that's important in the clinician setting, and even in the warfighter setting, or even in the executive branch. All of them have that challenge where they want to make sure that they're using the most accurate data to make the most expedient decisions for the future of this country. So my hope is that within 5 years, and the hope is not business strategy, my old CFO said. But is that by that time, we've kind of gotten these data governance and data management structures in place where we can share data across these agencies, and everyone can kind of take advantage of this larger data taxonomy, because we have such a rich data set at our hands. It's just kind of getting it all collected and understanding what we have and how to best use it.
Excellent. Thank you, Gary. And I'll echo that, exactly what you said, and Amanda as well, around this idea of evidence-based action, right? Like even just in the past week, Congress released a bill, to be more data-driven, like looking into the role of a chief data officer. So it isn't just the executive branch and all these agencies, it's the legislative branch, it's everyone across government making this acknowledgement. So it's great, and we look forward to that future. So before we wrap up, I just want to open the floor to all three of you for any closing comments. I really appreciate you joining us. Captain Erickson, I'll turn to you for final comments.
Listen, I always take this opportunity to let people know that the Coast Guard is hiring. Okay, we need data professionals within the organization. We've got a great mission. It's an exciting organization that has an absolute awesome mission, and you can do so many things. You can be a helicopter pilot, to a budget officer, to flying fixed wing, doing engineering, and then all of a sudden become a chief data officer. So number one, come join the Coast Guard, and you can also follow our story by searching LinkedIn for Coast Guard Office of Data and Analytics. Thanks a lot for having me.
Thank you, Brian. Yeah, and we'll add that as a resource on the site here as well, so folks can see it. Dr. Lienau, we'll turn to you for closing comments.
What I love about working for the VA is that as a very large organization, there's opportunities to continue to develop new skills, to continue to train. So we have pharmacist informaticists, we have nurse informaticists, we have people who are non-clinical informaticists. So people who want to develop and learn skills over the course of their career. The VA is a great place to do that, to continue to grow, to continue to develop, and to find another way to serve your country. If you do not serve as a young person, you have another chance to serve your country at the VA. Thanks.
Thank you, Dr. Lienau. I appreciate both you and Captain Erickson here and the incredible missions that you're working on for our country. So thank you both. Gary, I'll turn to you. Thanks again for joining us, and any closing comments.
No, thanks for having us. I think the biggest thing that I get excited about working for Hitachi Vantara Federal is our ability to bring dual use technologies to bear in the federal mission. We're part of a much larger company. We only focus on the federal piece of it, but we're able to take all those commercial learnings and apply them to the federal mission, and that's a really exciting thing that we get to do. And I get to see it across everyone, DoD, civilian, the IC. So there's a lot of innovative technologies that a lot of people are working on, specifically around data, that we get to help with, and it really is an exciting time for us.
Thank you, Gary. Thank you to all of you, Gary, Brian, Amanda, for your participation today. Thanks to everyone in the audience for joining this panel. We hope you enjoyed the conversation. So on behalf of MeriTalk, want to thank Hitachi again for sponsoring today's program. Thanks to our panelists. Thanks to everyone for joining us. If you missed anything, folks, we'll share a link to all registrants to view this on demand as well. And next up, we have a panel focusing on the human side of data. I know we touched on it a little bit, but we'll explore in even more detail. It's moderated by MeriTalk's James Watkins-Shaw and sponsored by Pluralsight. So James, take it away. Thanks so much.